So in Halo 2, there is a secret character you can play as that's technically a vehicle, and the steps to do this aren't easy. So can we unlock this playable character? Let's give it a shot! So in case you haven't figured it out from the intro, the character slash vehicle slash NPC that we're going to be trying to play as today is a sentinel. Now this is one of the cooler NPCs that you can play as in Halo 2 because you can fly. But being able to turn into a sentinel isn't exactly easy. Regardless, I'm going to try to figure it out. Now to do this glitch, we first need to set some skulls in motion or else we won't be able to do it. And the four that we're going to need are Sputnik, Black Eye, Boom, and Bandanna. Today, I try to play as a sentinel through a various series of steps provided by Dr. Biz. Now it's hard to explain why I'll need these skulls beforehand, so what I'm going to do is explain it to you as I'm going through this trick. So you'll need at least 2 players, but right at the beginning of the mission's sacred icon, you'll need to throw a frag grenade and kill exactly 3 of these tiny sentinels before they shoot a single shot. Then you need to throw a grenade in the left corner by the elevator to kill the solo grunt before he shoots a shot. From here, we then need to grenade jump up to this specific ledge. We're getting set up in what is called a pinch. It's when one player is in an area where the ceiling is so low that the second player's prompt to respawn actually disappears. After the first player gets set up here, it's now the end of their turn. From here, the second player needs to wait for one sentinel to spawn in, then they need to stick it with a grenade and make sure that they're killing both the sentinel and themselves at the same time. And once again, if this sentinel shoots, then we need to reset this trick entirely. And naturally it did, so this attempt wasn't going to work. Now I didn't exactly have a good feel for this, especially after one attempt, so I figured I'd probably get a lot better at doing this and closer to turning into the sentinel as time went on. I knew this was going to take me at least a few attempts, and because this trick is somewhat difficult to understand, I wanted to make sure that you guys had exactly the tips of why I was doing what I was doing. So the trick to pulling this off is you have to do this relatively quickly or else it won't work no matter if you do the steps correctly or not. After the first player is set up on that ledge in the pinch, the sentinel will then come out of one of 2 entrances, either at the back of the room or at the right side. If the second player can successfully stick the sentinel without it shooting, then like I mentioned earlier, the prompt to respawn for player 2 will disappear from player 1's screen. From here, you can then restart the mission because we're on to our second steps, which are pretty much the same. You need to once again throw a frag grenade to kill those 3 sentinels before they shoot at the beginning platform. Then you need to throw a grenade to kill the grunt before he shoots, but instead of getting up in that pinch spot, we need to throw another grenade that's just a dummy. The reason is we need to have the exact same item count as we produced before. But what's different this time is we're trying to kill both the sentinel and ourselves at the same time, but with player 1 instead of player 2. Now at this point, I thought I had done this successfully. I was on to my final step. With my second player, I needed to continuously beat down and delay the respawn of the first player. I needed to do this until that sentinel was about to spawn in, but I messed it up. There's a trick to delaying the respawn of a second player. You need to simultaneously jump and beat down while moving. But the trick of it is, you need to beat down as you're hitting the ground. If you're just wildly swinging and not beating down when you're hitting the ground, eventually that second player will spawn in. But anyways, I was on to my third attempt, and I messed this one up because I missed my plasma grenade, as you can see, so I ruined the item count. Now the item count, when you do this on the first attempt before you restart the mission, needs to match the item count when you do this after restarting the mission. If these item counts are mismatched, this will not work. This will never work. And this is also why you can't have any of those enemies shoot, because every single time that they shoot, that counts as an item added to the game. When you set up your pinch successfully, there's a sequence of spawning events. So the sentinel that comes out of the wall, for example, would be like item count 30 or something. What I need to do is produce the exact item count needed for the next thing to spawn as the sentinel. And if you set up a pinch where the second player can't respawn and then restart the mission, the first player will then be the next item to spawn in the item count. Now I know, this is probably really confusing. If you execute all of the steps that I'm trying in this and nothing shoots, you should be able to pull this off. Now there are a couple weird things that you need to consider that might ruin your ability to do this. For example, if either of the player's arbiter bodies fall off the ledge, that's going to ruin the item count. Now on this one, you can see I didn't delay the checkpoint successfully because I was beating down in midair as opposed to when I was touching the ground. So that would mean I'd have to do this again. But luckily, if you do the first part successfully and get the pinch set up and restart the mission, you only have to do the second half of the trick because you have a checkpoint. But if you messed up any of the part of the setup for the pinch before you restarted the mission, it doesn't matter what you do after you restart the mission, you're not going to be able to set it up correctly. On this attempt, I thought I had it, right up until the very end, and then, once again, the sentinel shot me. And because I don't want to make you guys sit here and watch me fail over and over and over and over and over and over again, I'm going to show you what a successful attempt looks like. Shilt off the rip throws a frag grenade, gets a 3-for-1 good start, throws another frag grenade in the corner to kill the grunt, then throws a plasma grenade right off the rip to get up to the pinch spot. Now he's having his second player go and stick the sentinel and die simultaneously. Looks like he's made a pretty killer discovery right now. By activating the active camouflage, the sentinel won't see him so he can easily stick it. Looks like the sentinel didn't get off a shot, so he can successfully restart this mission. One thing Shilt has to be careful about right here is if he hears the sound of another sentinel spawning in, this isn't gonna work. So he needs to make sure that he restarts the mission before this happens. Now Shilt is going for the exact same setup again, throws a frag grenade at the ground, gets all three once again. Now he tosses the grenade into the corner, kills the grunt, throws another dummy plasma grenade to match the item count. Clutch at this point. Now all he's got to do is turn invisible and kill that sentinel and himself without dying. It looks like this sentinel came out of the right side doorway. Oh, it looks like he's turning on his active camouflage here and going from behind. A little bit of a different strategy than previous attempts. Gets the stick off. Oh, he kills the sentinel and himself at the same time. Now we're on to our last step. The second player has to do here is delay his beatdown until that sentinel is about to spawn in, and then if he stops during this, he'll be a sentinel. Yes, finally, there we go. Okay, I am now a sentinel. So the reason that we turned on the Black Eye Skull is because, quite frankly, I can't stand the sound of low shields beeping in Halo. Drives me nuts. And weirdly enough, the Sentinel has beatdown capabilities, and they're actually really powerful. Like, you can one-tap anything when you beat down as a Sentinel. How do I go up? I'm like crouching. Now the controls are kind of wonky for this because you're not supposed to be technically playing it as his character. But another cool fact about the Sentinels is they can pick up guns and shoot them. They just only shoot Sentinel beams. I can shoot with plasma too? The hell? So now that we've successfully turned into a Sentinel, I need to reveal to you that now we're on to our actual trick. Now for years, I've wondered if it's possible to somehow get from the top of this massive wall at the beginning of Sacred Icon all the way to the bottom with one corner ride. And to my knowledge, this trick hasn't been pulled off. And the reason for that is simple. Right at the beginning of the mission's Sacred Icon, there are invisible barriers that prevent you from going left or right on this platform. Now, there's only one 90-degree corner on this entire wall that would allow you to survive all the way from the top of it to the bottom. And the reason we had to turn into a Sentinel is that's pretty much the only way to get to this corner. Now you can just fly up to the top of this wall as a Sentinel, but one effect of doing this is the second player, when they die, they spawn on top of you, which makes you move pretty quickly downward. Shit. Oh shit, he came on top of me. Didn't mean it like that. He'll spawn in the air for whatever reason. That's so weird. Apparently you don't have to be on land for him to spawn in when you're a Sentinel. Oh, get off of me. No! What the hell? This is so dangerous. Hypothetically, you can get to the top of this wall normally without doing this glitch, but you can't get to that 90-degree corner because on the wall there is a sheer cliff drop of about 200 feet. And there's no way that you could possibly survive that fall. Is there like another setting on this? To speed? Set it to speed? Because there are two barriers on the side of the initial platform, you also can't grenade launch to that point in the wall either. It took about 35 minutes to get to this point, but now I was at the 90-degree angle at the top of the wall that I planned on using to safely descend doing what's called a corner ride. Dude, trying to get this guy to spawn in is a freaking nightmare. For whatever reason, even when you're in the middle of the air, the second player still just spawns in right above your head. Apparently, the sentinel's body registers as a solid platform. But from this point, I wanted to venture forth as the sentinel further into the mission. Reason for this is I wanted a checkpoint. The setup took a while to do. If something were to happen, I wanted to make sure I had a checkpoint to be able to repeat attempts for this corner ride. Now, I could spawn my second player down at the initial platform and then have him progress through the mission, but when you're doing an AUP glitch, that is, arbitrary unit possession, which is what it's called when you turn into a non-playable character, load zones are a little bit weird. And if you don't take the non-playable character first through the mission and hit the load zones with them, oftentimes they'll just despawn entirely. And there's nothing you can really do if you don't have a checkpoint, because you'd have to set it all up again. I made it down the elevator shaft without any problems, but then when I was getting to the second airlock vent, I turned around, looked up, and saw an area that I thought looked cool, and naturally from this point I went over there, and of course, because nothing ever happens on the first time in this show... What the hell? Did I get a checkpoint or no? I hit a death barrier on the ceiling in a room with nothing around it as an NPC. Why is there a death barrier there? Why? That is so dumb. While I didn't have a checkpoint, I could use my teammate as a spawning beacon. Now this wouldn't exactly be efficient because when you die in Halo 2, you don't spawn back in until your physical body hits a surface. And the closest surface here, the bottom of the map, thousands of feet away. So this would mean the time in between attempts would be anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. Now, if you haven't seen any of my previous videos on corner riding, I've added them as cards. But basically how corner riding works is, if you find a 90-degree angle that's protruding, you can slow down your fall rate each time you pass from one side of the 90 degree to the other. I definitely don't think this was intended by the game developers, but this isn't easy. It definitely takes a lot of practice to get used to. And even past that, this wall is huge. I estimated that I'd probably have to be corner riding for around 1 minute straight. And when you're falling this distance, you pick up speed pretty fast. And then, as a force of habit, you revert to the last checkpoint. But you didn't have a checkpoint. You didn't have a checkpoint the entire mission. So now you have to reset this entire glitch and become a sentinel again. But we're not going to go through that painstaking process, so I'm just going to show you this. Nice, did it again. Took about 10 to 15 minutes to pull that off again, but I repeated the same steps as before, flying my sentinel over to the 90 degree, but this time I was going to send my second player through the mission and leave myself as the sentinel here. There are certain points in Sacred Icon that if you get to them, they automatically trigger a checkpoint. I had my second player do this, then I had them die and spawn on me on the wall, and then from this point I had my second player kill my first player so I could spawn back in and try this corner ride. And it turns out I got actually pretty lucky by getting a checkpoint right after I died as the sentinel. Now I wasn't right next to this 90 degree, but all I had to do was jump down, and if I failed, I had a free checkpoint now. Now, the challenge begins. No! Woo! That is the longest wall ride you can do in Halo 2. Big ups. Big ups. Holy shit. Yes. Whew. Wow. That was exhilarating. Also so scary, dude. I kept zoning out. It's so hard to maintain focus doing left and right on a little corner, back and forth, especially on a mouse. I feel like it would probably be easier on a controller, but I pretty much don't know how to play controller anymore. Yes, I'm weak. Yes, I am weak.